Batman is one of the most iconic characters in media. With solid innovations in the 7th generation of consoles and the success of the Dark Knight trilogy, it established a fairly solid want for a good Batman game with a more gritty feel, akin to the Christopher Nolan films. But did Batman Arkham Asylum succeed? Well, when it comes to the story, not exactly. The storytelling is fine, but much more akin to the animated series from the 90s, albeit with a bit more modern plotline. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, as the animated series was my major introduction to the character, but Arkham Asylum still manages to provide enough basic information that you understand the primary characters' connections with each other, even if you hadn't seen any other material from the franchise. There's also a decent amount of collectibles that give you more detailed lore on the specific characters. Honestly, I think the overall premise is great. All hell breaks loose in Arkham Asylum, and now you are trapped on a small island with some of the best villains in comic book history. However, I am a bit disappointed about how few villains appear. That's because the base combat in Arkham Asylum is pretty good. It heavily borrows from Spider-Man 2, which is a legendary game amongst superhero and movie tie-ins in its own right. And while it has been a long time since I played Spider-Man 2, I think that Batman Arkham Asylum does do a better job with the fighting. While you can button mash your way through hand-to-hand fights, it's actually encouraged to slow down a little bit and strategically pull finishing moves. Of course, you also need to employ stealth against enemies armed with guns. This fits well with the action-adventure feel, and the addition of the detective mode adds a sensible solution to Batman's human limitations and a useful aid for his detective prowess. My biggest gripe with the gameplay is the boss fights. Like I said, Batman has the coolest villains, and this game features fewer than I'd expect, but still manages to make them all feel fundamentally the same. To be fair, I'm not really sure how they could have made it feel much more different, but I would have liked a little bit more variety, or even like a Mega Man element, where brawlers like Bane could have been handled the same way, but maybe when you fight against Ivy, you can optionally use some sort of modified weapon or gas you got from another boss fight, or at least something a little bit different. But all in all, it is about par with other action adventures of the time. But visually, I think Batman Arkham Asylum holds up fairly well. There is some minor pixelation in some of the cutscenes, and some rough edges on the vents and other aging lighting elements, but overall, I think it has aged fairly well, and honestly think it looks better than some AAA games that released in the following years, and I absolutely love the art style. Voice acting is top notch. Both Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill reprise their respective roles from the animated series. I'm not a big fan of some of the choices they made for other characters, but it's just a personal opinion, and none of the performers do a bad job. They just don't fit how I would expect these characters to sound from my limited exposure to the universe. Unfortunately, like most 7th generation games, Batman Arkham Asylum basically has no accessibility features. While there are subtitles, there is no in-game way to change either the written or spoken language. There are 3 difficulties, but you cannot change between them once you've started. You can remap controls in the launch menu, but there's no in-game way to remap buttons on the controller that you will likely play this game on. Batman Arkham Asylum is a little bit more convenient. It's available on Xbox 360, One, PlayStation 3, 4, and Switch, as well as being available digitally on GOG, Steam, and Epic. It also has a decent settings menu, though most of the important settings are only available through the launch menu. I also noticed one minor graphical hiccup, but found no other significant bugs. Honestly, I really enjoyed playing Batman Arkham Asylum both times I played it. It is a functionally solid game with an okay story in a really cool setting. However, I remember finishing it for the first time and thinking that I would never play it again. It's not that it's bad, it just doesn't really have much to warrant another playthrough. And even after all these years, when I got to the first interaction with Scarecrow, I was impressed, thinking that it held up well visually, but then shortly remembered the boss gameplay elements that follow through the rest of the game. While I liked venturing around the asylum again and loved the combat, I just got bored at every boss fight, particularly with the slow motion. I think it is a good game, perhaps the best Batman game I have played, but even after all these years, I can't quite stomach the completion of a second playthrough. This leads me to think that it earns a decent, as I like it enough to think of it as a game you should play, but only a game you should play if you haven't played it before. But let me know what you think about the Arkham series in the comments below. Check out my last video on Dragon's Dogma and consider subscribing. Until then, this has been Rob the Slob, and I'll see you in the virtual commute.